So here is the second in my installment of answering questions that came out of the Bible study from people who sent me questions. And this is actually a set of 5 questions, all kind of related to the same topic that came out of chapter 4 of the book that we've been working through. So I'm just going to go through each of these questions one at a time and make my comments and then make that available to everyone. So here's the first question. What does Eve lost confidence in God mean? I think you explained this as doubt of God doing the best kind of thing for her or them. So the reason why Eve gave into temptation was because she, in some way, began to doubt whether or not God had her best interests in mind. That's what it means that she lost confidence in God, and that it would be better if Eve took control of her own life in the sense of, well, I'm going to do the things that I think are best, including eating the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So the way that she was able to do that, to have that action of disobeying God, was, first of all, she had to not believe that what God had commanded was in fact what was best for her, or advantageous, or whatever. So in that sense, she lost confidence in God. So that's what that line means, I think. Question number 2. Luther's quote. In summary, I believe that it says that God provides for all of our needs. Don't we bear some responsibility for this? This person asks. If people didn't have jobs, etc., sitting around all the time, wouldn't they end up in a bad way? Or is this sin in my thinking, doubting God? So the sense here is that we have to understand what Luther meant when he says that God provides for everything, for all of our needs, is that God provides for all of our needs through the world as we know it. That is, a world with natural resources, including food and minerals and oil and sunshine and all these things that allow us to live, right? And the communities that we are part of, so that some who are farmers grow the food, some who are carpenters build shelters, homes, and some who are teachers, teach, and so on and so forth. And Luther definitely saw that all of those roles that are part of communities are part of God's provision. That God is the one who provides us with our neighbors, with the raw materials to work with, that enables us to meet all of our needs. And in fact, then, if some of our needs are not being met, it's not because God is not providing, it's because we aren't doing a good job of sharing those resources that God has placed here on earth for us. So I've heard it said that there is no reason for anyone to go hungry. That we have enough food, we're able to grow enough food in our world to feed everyone. The problem is food distribution, that we don't do a good job of sharing that which we produce. So that's what Luther is getting at there. And then quoting something on page 38, there's this phrase: what creates this is inherent. And here's the question: does this mean that sin is human nature? And my response to that would be being sinful, that is, having that self-centeredness that says that we're going to do things my way, and I'm not going to worry about how this impacts other people or the world. That is, in fact, part of our nature. Part of our nature that we have to get past. So we teach children to share. Why do we teach them to share? Because it is in our nature to not want to share, to hoard everything, and so you can see this with toddlers who insist that every toy in the room is theirs, and they're not going to let their cousin play with that because that's mine. That's mine. And the parents have to come in and say, no, listen, you've got your toys here. You can share your toys with Johnny here. And well, it's mine. It's a learning experience. And so even in children, we see this inherent self-centeredness that is what I would say is the simplest way to define sin. Sin, in its simplest definition, is self-centeredness, or being turned in on self. And so, yes, I would say that is part of human nature, but it's not something that needs to control human nature, that through Christ and the work of the Holy Spirit, we can actually become people who are not controlled by that nature, but instead can be, like Christ, self-giving and serving others, caring for others, and considering the needs of others ahead of our own. That is possible because of Christ, I would say. Question 4, quoting something from page 40, the last sentence. However, in some point in our journey to spiritual renewal and faith, all of us need to name sin. And this person asks, what does all of us need to name sin mean? What I think it means is quite simply to identify, to acknowledge that sin is something that we wrestle with, that it is part of our lives. And if we don't acknowledge that there is a problem, then we may not ever seek to rectify that problem. So ignoring a problem, pretending it doesn't exist, doesn't mean that it's not there. The 12-step programs, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous will say that the first thing you need to do is admit that there's a problem. If you admit that there's a problem, well, then you're starting down the road to recovery. So in the same way, I would say that when we're dealing with sin, we need to name it. We need to recognize it, acknowledge it, and see how it is part of our lives, so that then we can, with God's help, strive to move past that, to live differently and to function out of a different basis other than our self-centeredness. And then question 5. Reading Genesis 4:13, the notes at the bottom of the page in the Lutheran Study Bible that this person has, she was talking about punishment versus consequences. I looked up the difference, and I wonder if the expulsion from the Garden of Eden was punishment and not consequences. What lesson would Adam and Eve have learned? There was no way they were going to be able to return to the garden. Likewise, with Cain, I don't see what the consequence of him being cursed teaches him. On the other hand, in the example I saw online, related an instance of a child leaving a baseball mitt in the driveway, rather than reprimanding him for not putting it away, leaving it in the driveway where it gets rained on, teaches the lesson of responsibility. So, in the stories of Adam and Eve, and then later Cain and Abel, what is in effect here? Is it consequence or is it punishment? And I would say, in a sense, it's both. And let's look at Adam and Eve first. So their expulsion from the garden is the consequence of their choice. But the consequence is also a form of punishment, in the sense that their life is made worse, but that is to teach them something. What is it to teach them? It's to teach them that they should rely on God and not be self-centered. And so what are some of the things that teach them that? Well, according to Genesis, now the man who's tilling the soil, has to deal with weeds and stuff. And the woman is going to have pain and childbirth. And these hardships that we face as humans remind us that we create pain for ourselves and others when we turn away from God's way, when we turn away from God's desire for us, God's will. So the pain that we experience is both consequence and also punishment. So I would say how this plays out in life today is similar. So someone can do something wrong, and maybe they suffer a punishment, that is a fine is laid out, or they're treated, they're removed from a certain group, or whatever the punishment might be. So that, that's supposed to teach them something. It's supposed to also, in a sense, I think most of the punishment that we have today is intended to try and prevent us from breaking those rules in the first place. So for fear of punishment, we will not speed, or we will not steal, or whatever it might be. So in that regard, breaking these rules or whatever is punishment, but it's also the consequences. And what we know is that the consequences are actually broader than the punishment often. So let's say someone has been stealing, and then they're caught. Well, even before they're caught, there's already a consequence going on, and that is within that community where the thefts are taking place, people are less trusting. And so the consequence is already starting to happen. Trust is starting to be eroded, right? So now the person is caught, and now there's punishment. Maybe they're thrown in jail, or they're fined, or whatever, and that's their punishment. But there's also other punishment which isn't official, and that is suddenly people now look at this person with suspicion, and that's going to stay with them for a long time. It's like, oh, that's so and so, and they were stealing, and I'm not going to let them come into my house. I'm not going to deal with them, So that's both consequence, but also a sort of an unofficial punishment. So these two things, consequence and punishment, I think are interconnected. Let's look at the question specifically about Cain being marked or cursed. So what's interesting about Cain being cursed is that he now wanders. He's now a wanderer. He has no place. But really, when you kill your brother, you've basically already removed yourself from the family. You have no family land anymore, because or homeland or home, because you've destroyed it. And so he's cursed to wander the earth. But God marks him, and what's interesting about the mark is that it prevents him from being killed. And so even in the punishment, we see an act of compassion on God's part, that God treats Cain with mercy that he doesn't deserve. Like he kills his brother for really no good reason at all. And God, there's a consequence to that. Because if there's no consequences to our actions, well, that's not a fair and a just world either. So there has to be consequences, and there's consequences. But then God does make it possible for Cain to survive in this world that is filled with a lack of trust and with violence. And that's sadly, a picture of too much of our world today. So I don't know. Hopefully, I kind of answered those questions in a way that was helpful. And that does it for this round. If there's more questions that are emailed to me in the future, I'll address those as well in this same manner. And as always, I'm open to a discussion with anyone about any of these things. So thanks, and have a good day.